Schiff?
No, I'm just going to kneel behind you here. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is 15 February, the year 2003. I'm Dr. Dave Thompson, a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of World War II. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in our country's military conflicts. Today, I'm here at the museum and have the honor and privilege of interviewing Colonel John Schiff. Dr. Schiff was a classmate of mine from my hometown and was a Navy dental officer attached to the 3rd Marines in Vietnam, and he became involved in the Tet Offensive. So we're going to talk to him about that and a lot of other things. Nice to have you here, John.
Thank you, David.
Okay. John, would you spell your full name for us, please?
First name Jon, last name Schiff.
And when and where were you born?
Born 23 December 1940 in Evansville, Indiana.
And where is that good old Evansville, Indiana?
That's the very southern tip of Indiana, right on the Kentucky border. The Ohio River separates us from Kentucky.
Better known as Heavensville.
Evansville, yeah, that's right, if you don't live there.
And what was your dad's name?
My father's name was Edward Schiff. He worked at Serval until they closed down.
What did he do at Serval?
He was basically trained in tool and die making, as a lot of Germans were, and he worked his way up from a tool and die maker at Serval to become the plant manager.
And what did they produce there?
During the war, they made ammunition for anti-aircraft shells, but their main job was produce refrigerators.
Right. Yeah. I think they also, or at least my dad worked at Serval too, and the plant that he was in, they built the P-47 airplanes.
That's right.
Too.
It was Republic Aviation. They built the Jug.
Yeah. Right. And your dad's background, where did your ancestors all come from?
On both sides of my family, my ancestors came from Germany.
Do you know where in Germany? Or?
I suspect it was, from what I can find, it was from the Alsace region where Germany and France came together and they changed sides multiple times.
And do you know about when they first came to the United States?
My grandparents' parents came from Germany. It was total German ancestry on both sides.
Did they come directly to Evansville, or did they live elsewhere before they did?
From what I can find out, they lived in a while in Kentucky and then migrated north to Evansville because it was a big, at that time, industrial area.
What kind of work did your grandfather do?
My grandfather, Barthel, actually owned a grocery store in the west side of Evansville. It's called Barthel's Hillside Grocery. And my father's father, I'm not sure.
Okay, and what was your mother's name?
Anna Marie Barthel.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
2 sisters, one older, one younger. Judy was the oldest sister, Jane was the youngest.
And where do they live now?
My sister Judy is a nurse. She lives in Amarillo, Texas. My younger sister Jane is just retired as a guidance counselor at a large high school west of Chicago in Oak Park, Illinois.
Okay. And where did you live? What street did you live on? Do you remember?
I lived in a poor section of town. It was close to St. Benedict's Parish. You were known back in Evansville by if you were Catholic, which parish you lived close to. It was called Kurth Avenue. When I was in high school, we moved to a newer, albeit smaller place on Diamond Avenue. It's still on the east side.
Okay. And where did you go to grade school?
Went to grade school at St. Benedict's and high school at Memorial High School.
Okay. What did you like to do when you were growing up? Like play sports or what?
Yes. Probably like yourself, I played baseball, basketball, football, and enjoyed all of them. Baseball kind of went by the wayside when when I went away to college and concentrated more on basketball.
Okay. Did you play any organized sports in high school?
I was always the youngest guy. I was like a year younger than everybody in my class, and I never grew until I went to to college, and so I was like the shrimp of the class, and I played, but never any varsity sports, always intramural.
Did you have any girlfriends in high school?
I had several girlfriends. I'll just leave it at that.
Did you have any jobs when you were going to school?
I had, like you, Dave, my interviewer, every menial job known to man, and the morning started with my paper route. Get up at 4:45, and any kind of weather. And the Indiana winters are not kind, and delivered the Courier, Evansville Courier. I had to ride a mile on my bike. I took my dog with me, and
What was your dog's name?
Mickey, and he was a little black mutt, and the job taught me to have discipline, to get up in the morning, and responsibility. And at the same time I had that job, on weekends I worked as a busboy at a restaurant called the Spaghetti Bowl, and a little later on I was a busboy at Mac's Barbecue. I also worked at Lloyd's Ice Cream, and that's pretty much it.
I remember, and this was when you were in college, I believe, you had a job that didn't last real long. That
With
did a
you,
lot of nice traveling.
I had a job with you, David. I'm embarrassed to say I wasn't a great salesman, but we both sold encyclopedias door to door.
Colliers, as I recall.
That's right. And I wasn't a very good encyclopedia salesman. And you had to wear a coat and a tie, and be well dressed and make this presentation. And I think I sold a total of 3 sets in my whole career as an encyclopedia salesman. It did teach me a valuable lesson, though, and that is I didn't want to be a door-to-door salesman.
Yeah, that was pretty tough going door to door. I tell you, it got me somewhat over my shyness.
That's right. We were both shy.
Yeah, I know.
And still are.
Yeah, that's right. So you graduated from Memorial. Now, when did you first become interested in dentistry?
Walking to high school when I was 16, my junior year, I'd worked in a restaurant. I saw the good, the bad, the ugly of retailing, I had a very forceful mother who was always pushing me to excel, and I didn't really appreciate it at that time, but I do now. She was a very different woman, and she lived vicariously, I think, through her children, and I was her favorite. And my mother's idea of a good time was go to Dress Memorial Airport and watch the planes take off. And now I think, being older and wiser, in her heart she always wanted to be on those airplanes, but she never could. And somehow I got the urge to travel, and left Evansville at 17 and basically never went back.
And you, where'd you go to college for your pre-dent?
Went to pre-dental at St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas. I remember we'd have to go to Vincennes to catch a train, and we'd go down there on the train, and sometimes I didn't have enough money to get a ticket, so I would sneak on the train and hide under the tables and everything as the conductor came by to punch your tickets, but I would usually make it.
And why did you choose St. Ed's?
Because it gave me a small grant and aid. I was from a very poor family, and we didn't, my parents really didn't have any money to send me to college. And I was the first one from my family to go to college, and that gave me a small grant and aid because I had good grades in high school, and it was kind of affiliated with Memorial High School. The same brothers of the Holy Cross taught at St. Edward's, and I went there for 2 years. Knew exactly what I wanted to do, so I chose all the right subjects, managed to get all A's and B's, and get accepted into dental school after 2 years.
I remember you brought me back, I guess, a burnt orange University of Texas football jersey.
Exactly, it was in the same city, Austin.
I know,
And,
right, and I wore that until it just fell apart. That was my favorite thing to wear.
I'm glad you reminded me of that.
So you got accepted to Indiana University
Yes.
School of Dentistry, which is in what area of Indianapolis could you describe that?
It was, well, you and I lived in the same all-black YMCA the first part of our first freshman year.
Mm-hmm.
And you managed to find all kinds of jobs, and I was a desk clerk at the all-black YMCA and also the lifeguard, and they gave me my room and board for that. Then
we played a lot of basketball.
We played a lot of basketball at that. They had a wonderful basketball court.
It was
there.
a brand new facility, actually.
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly, and a lot of good black basketball players, and it was where Oscar Robertson
Just
grew up,
right
his neighborhood.
Exactly.
And we could walk to dental school from there as long as the snow wasn't too bad, and it was our start. And then you went on to work at another hospital.
LaRue Carter. I worked there for a while, and other different jobs, just like you.
And I moved across the street to General Hospital, which was now Wishart Hospital. It was, I call it the Knife and Gun Club. My main remembrance of that place was you would go in to work at the emergency room exit, and there was a police car parked there. And when I came out, the police car was jacked up on blocks, and the tires had been stolen. So it was a rough neighborhood. And going through the parking lot, I managed to keep two women from getting mugged. I came upon the mugger, and helped the muggy. It was we lived in an old, decrepit Civil War section of the hospital, and I slept in a bunk bed. And my roommate was a medical student, and there were 18 guys that lived there, and we shared one bathroom. We took a shower in one of those bathtubs, so you can imagine the ring in that bathtub.
And how did you like dental school?
I liked dental school. I always had quite an interest in biology and medicine and dentistry, and I liked it. It was sometimes difficult, sometimes not difficult. There was always that pressure of getting your requirements out of the way. After the first 2 years, and we start working in a clinic, there was that, it was like a weight on your shoulders trying to get all your requirements out of the way, finding the right patients to do the right procedures so you could get that checked off and be done with it. The first 2 years, the first year, as you remember, was the most difficult. I think they tried to weed out those who didn't need to be there. And if you got it past the first year, you could pretty much get through, I think.
What did you do during the summer times?
During the summer times, thanks to your wonderful help, I got a job with the Indianapolis Park Department. And it wasn't a glamorous job, but we would have to, once again, get up early in the morning, and we would drive a truck, and it had a pump and an air hose and a mask, and you had a weight belt, and we would go to the bottom of the Indianapolis Park Department swimming pools and brush the dirt to the drain, and then in the same truck we had these big tanks of chlorine that weighed a ton, and we would wrestle them down the stairs to the room where the chlorine supply was and take the spent tubes back and load them in the truck. And sometimes I was late and I didn't have time to take the truck back. I would drive the truck to school.
Who were some of your best friends in dental school?
The gentleman interviewing me, Dave Thompson, he's a gentleman and always has been. And he, how can I say this and have it come out right? He was from a poor family like myself, but he always had more class than I ever had.
Well, one thing I remember, we used to always play a lot of one-on-one basketball.
One-on-one basketball.
And you were quicker than I was, and so I made up the rule that you couldn't guard me out past the free throw line.
I'd forgotten about that.
And I would dribble up real close to the free throw line, and I'd point to your toes because they're on the line, and you'd look down. As soon as you looked down, I would jump up and shoot over you. And I got you every time. So I don't know how much class that was.
Well, but it shows how unintelligible I was. How I didn't learn.
But we had a lot of fun together, I think, a lot of times. Yeah. And how did you first become acquainted with the Navy?
I'm not quite sure, but I think you and we knew that we didn't have any money. We were borrowing money to go to school, and we knew that when we got out, we had a loan to repay, and if you went in the Navy, you were given a grace period where you didn't have to pay the money back right away. And last but not least, I wanted to travel and see the world, and that was my ticket to get out of Indiana.
It was a little bit different for me. It wasn't so much that as it was that I had known, maybe you did too, a couple of dentists in Evansville who, when they got out of dental school, they set up practice, and then the Korean War came along and they were called back into service and had to leave their practice. And so that was one of the main reasons that I didn't want to deal with that. But I, like you, I always kind of liked the military, the Navy, just the atmosphere of it, you know, and wanted to do perhaps some traveling and things like that. So.
I've been interested in the military. In your house today, I saw that book on life's picture history of World War II. My mother ordered that, and I took that as my own, and I read that thing 1,000 times. And from that moment on, I was hooked on the military.
Yeah. And as I recall, they came, the various, I think it was during our freshman year, the recruiters came around, and you and I both chose the Navy.
Yes.
And
we liked the uniforms.
Yeah. And you remember, and I had just read a lot of the old John Paul Jones, you know, and the old ships and the salt, and it just seemed exciting, glamorous kind of a thing.
Exactly.
And then, as I recall, between our junior and senior year, we went back to Newport, Rhode Island for orientation.
They made us, or they attempted to make us officers and gentlemen. They showed us how to wear the uniform. We got paid, and I remember the first thing we did was go to the Navy Exchange and buy things. I bought a suitcase, I still remember, in the hopes of future adventure.
Yeah, that was kind of a neat deal. I don't know if you went with us. We met some neat guys back there. On weekends, we would go up to Cape Cod, you know,
right,
and have some fun
right.
there. So what year did you graduate from dental school then?
Same year as you, in 1964.
Right.
And 2 weeks later, I was on a plane for Japan. You were on a plane for Iceland?
No, North Carolina, Camp Lejeune,
Camp
Marines,
Lejeune.
2nd Marines down there. So you got orders to where then?
Naval Air Facility in Naha, Okinawa, which is the southernmost island of Japan.
And you were married at that time, I believe.
I was married, and I took a very young wife.
And her name was?
Judy. Her maiden name was Judy Simmons, and we took my second child. My first child was Michelle, born while I was in dental school. My second child was a son named John Scott, whom he was induced in labor so that we would make Judy was pregnant so we could make the plane to Japan, and the third child, Melissa, I delivered in the back of an ambulance in a traffic jam on the way to the Naval Hospital in Okinawa. Tied the cord off with the driver's shoelace and carried the baby in the hospital in a towel. So on Melissa's birth certificate it says born in Naha, Okinawa.
And so would they have one base hospital, or did they have satellite ones? Or
they had a small naval air facility where they flew P-3s, patrol aircraft in the Pacific, basically between the Philippines and Japan, and then this was the early rumblings of Vietnam, and they started market time, which were the P-3s would patrol off the coast of Vietnam And as I always do, I managed to get a ride on a P3 for a couple of those missions, and just to be an observer out of a porthole all night, and, just so I could say I'd been there.
Did you learn much about the World War II history and that Okinawa, the things that went on in the Battle of Okinawa while you were there?
Yes, it was a very interesting place because it was a very difficult battle, where the Marines and the Army came ashore at Buckner Bay, and it was a very difficult battle because of the topography of the land and because of the hills. And
You speak up a little, John.
and the Japanese soldiers always seemed to have the high ground, and we were fighting, our guys were fighting uphill. So, yeah, I drove all around and visited all the battle sites, and that became kind of a lifelong habit wherever I was overseas.
And so how long were you stationed there on Okinawa?
I was stationed there approximately 3 years, and from there I was sent to Naval Air Station in Lemoore, California, where all the pilots trained. It was a replacement air group. The A4s and A7 drivers would assemble there, do their weapons training at Fallon, Nevada, and get ready to go to carrier duty off of Vietnam.
And so when did you get there? 66 probably?
I got there in, yes, in 66, and I was there about a year, and about that time my marriage was going downhill, and basically that started on Okinawa, and I left my wife and children, and I put in for orders to Vietnam, and never saw the Navy work so quick. I had orders in 3 weeks to report to Camp Pendleton for Field Medical Service School, where I spent a month.
And tell me what that was like. What did you do there?
Well, basically they took naval officers, physicians and dentists, and taught us Marine skills, firing rifles, throwing grenades, wearing the uniform, marching. Although when we would march, the Marine enlisted would point and laugh at us because there was a bunch of Navy docs and we didn't know how to march. And but it was an interesting time, and it was my introduction to the Marine Corps, and my love affair with the Marine Corps, I should say, because I never forgot. That was the most memorable, moving part of my life. From there, they didn't waste any time. They sent, I flew to Da Nang, Republic of Vietnam, got off the plane, and like everybody else says, the smells and the heat hit you like a wall.
What time of the year was this?
This was mid-December of '67, and I reported to my commanding officer, and I got a ride from Da Nang to Phu-Bai, which...
Now, Da Nang was like one of the largest bases we had there, is that correct?
It was a large airfield and naval port. So
Bob Hope, from time to time, I think, would go in there.
He would go in to perform for the troops, yes. And unfortunately, I never got to see him. And I reported to my CO at a place called Wei Phu-Bai. They run the names together because the two places, the two cities are right together.
And how far from Da Nang was that?
It was about, I got a helo ride, so it was like a 30-minute helo ride. It wasn't very long. And they dropped me off there, and I spent my first night in Phu-Bai. It was a rainy, ugly night, and they just pointed me to this empty tent with cots in it, and it was next to a 155 battery firing all night. So between not being able to sleep, lying on a cot, listening to the mosquitoes flying around my head, I thought, what have I done to my life?
And this was, what was the topography, what was the vegetation and stuff like that?
This was the coastal area, and it was relatively flat. And like any estuary area, it was beaches and flat and sandy and mud, and not very pretty. As luck would have it, I had been a dentist for 3 years in the Orient, so my boss, who was a Navy captain, said, we need somebody to go up to a place called Camlo, it's like saying Boise, Idaho, and I said, well, why do you want me to do that? And he said, well, because all the other guys are right out of school, and you know how to do emergency treatments, and they may be a little shaky on that, being new dentists. I said, okay. And so I got in a truck and was driven up there, and they showed me this old Korean War trailer, and this is yours, make it into your dental facility, and then you're expected to go on the road to Contien, to the washout, to Camp Carroll, to the Rock Pile, and all these other places in the area, and get the Marines out of pain, because at that time the Marines, this was during the time of the draft, and they had, the military didn't care, they just wanted bodies, so they sent them over there with horrible teeth. They could have wall cavities, infections. They didn't care, they just wanted troops. And the Marine officers were always underhanded and undermanned, and they didn't like for their Marines to have to go back to Fubai or Da Nang for dental treatment. It was, you can't go on patrol with a puffed up jaw or a pain, or you can't sit at a listening post at night. You can't function. It's just like being wounded. And so my job was to go from artillery position to artillery position and just basically line them up in a bunker, start anesthetizing from one end of the line to the other, and then start turning and burning, taking out bad teeth, lancing abscesses, putting in drains, and sewing them up, and leaving. Most of the time I would spend the whole day at whatever artillery base I was at, and sometimes I would stay overnight. And these were not nice places. They were all well within artillery range of the North Vietnamese gunners, because we were right, the 3rd Marine Division was responsible for, their area of operation was along the DMZ. It was called the Trace at that time. It was our McNamara's line. It was a farce, because anybody who wanted to could be a blind man and go through without the Marines ever knowing it, pretty much. They patrolled in these areas and got into some really bad firefights, because there was no Viet Cong in this area. There was all first-line NVA troops.
Okay, tell me the difference between NVA and Viet Cong.
Viet Cong were the classical black pajama with the conical hat, which operated mostly south of Da Nang and then all the way down to Saigon and the Mekong Delta. As the war, from 1966 on, the first line North Vietnamese troops came down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they were well equipped, had their uniforms, had like pith helmets, and
so they were more formidable than the
they were
Viet
much
Cong?
more formidable, and they were a very valiant adversary who were not afraid to die. At least I never saw that in them. That was our adversary, and they were smart.
So did you get shelled any when you were going to those places?
I would be shelled mostly when I was at the places. It wasn't worse. I was a lone Jeep with a driver, a dental tech.
I meant when you were at the places.
Yeah, and we weren't a worthy target except for maybe an ambush. And but mostly, like at Con Tien, we received a lot of incoming. That was the northernmost artillery position in Vietnam, and it was notorious for the enemy had tried to overrun it on several occasions, and it was a bad place to be. They would rotate the Marine battalion in, and their tour of duty there would be 1 month, and they'd get them out of there. And when they left, they didn't look back. They were glad to go.
So you were with the 3rd Marine Division we're talking here?
3rd Marine Division, 3rd Dental Company.
And they were based out of Pendleton Division?
3rd Marine Division, their training was in Camp Pendleton. They were the Marines of the Pacific, like the Marines in the Atlantic come from Lejeune and Parris Island.
Yeah. 2nd Marines, I think, would that be.
And but the headquarters for the 3rd Marine Division has always been on Okinawa.
Oh.
So was like old home week for me. I flew into Okinawa before I went back to Vietnam.
Did you know any of the guys over there when you got there? You have any acquaintances or friends?
I didn't know a soul, and that was the one difference. The interviewer last night asked me why were there so many troubled veterans after Vietnam, in your opinion? And my answer was that in World War II in Korea, the soldiers, the docs, they all went over as a unit, and they had unit cohesion. When we were sent over as individuals, and especially along the DMZ, it was a dangerous place to be. Nobody wanted to befriend the new guys because the new guys hadn't learned how to take care of themselves and hadn't learned the noises, the sounds, the things, the dangers, when to duck. And so they didn't want to become friends with anybody because if you were going to be killed, your chances were you were going to be in the first month of your tour. And then I was the only Navy guy, myself and my dental tech, with the Marines at Camp Low. We were the only Navy people on the hill. And the hill overlooked a village, and there was a little river, the Camp Low River, that ran through the village. And a very strategic bridge there that ran from north to south, and all the supplies that went to Con Thien and the washout, a place in between Con Thien and Cam Lo, had to cross that bridge. We had a Vietnamese barber that came on our base, and he would, you'd sit down in his wooden chair and he'd cut your hair. And the night that the village, first time I ever heard a shot fired in anger was the night the village at the base of our hill almost got overrun. I say almost, it was a near disaster. And I only found out this year what really happened that night from the major that was the CO of that hilltop. And I do know that the barber that cut our hair was shot in the water trying to plant satchel charges at the base of the bridge to blow the bridge. Who would have thought? Yeah. And I was sitting on top of my bunker that night. They were attacking the Ville, and being a farm boy from Indiana, I thought I heard bees, and I said, well, wait a minute, bees don't come out at night. Any farm boy knows that. And I kept hearing these bees, and I said, what's wrong? And then I saw this green flash go by my left ear, and another green flash go by my right ear. I said, wait a minute, those are tracers. Every fourth round that the enemy fired was, with a machine gun, was a green tracer, and ours were, every fourth round was a red tracer. So I knew these weren't our guys firing, and basically they were firing from the base of the hill, trying to keep us from coming, our guys and our tanks from coming down to help the Ville.
How high was that hill?
It wasn't high at all. It was probably like a small foothill like you have here in Palm Springs, not like the mountains, and just enough elevation for artillery pieces, and that's why they chose the place. And it was strategically, tactically, it was a good location, because all the artillery bases had interlocking ranges, so if one was attacked, the others could fire to protect each other. So that's how we...
So you guys were able to get down there and beat them off, or whatever? Or how?
Our guys could not get down to help them because it was night, and they would be ambushed on the road on their way to help. So the guys at the Ville were on their own. And after the fact, I read the after-action report from Major Valisi, and there was a Marine Medal of Honor won that night in the Ville.
Yeah.
And they put up a heroic fight, and the Marines and a few indigenous South Vietnamese troops held the Ville, and then the enemy troops DD'd out because they didn't want the air power to come in and catch them in the morning light.
What were the weapons that the Marines used those days?
We had third tanks, so we had like 8 or 10 tanks that worked from the hill. A couple of the black guys that were in the tanks were good basketball players, and I got to become friends with them. And we had 81 millimeter mortars. When I got bored, I would go over to the mortar pit, and the guys would let me drop the mortars down the tubes. And we had 8-inch guns, which were indigenous only to the Marine Corps, I believe. They were an awesome weapon. They fired an 8-inch diameter projectile, and I think it could throw the projectile for 21 miles. And
so this is basically an artillery outfit.
yeah, we had 155s, 105s, and we had even an Ontos. I don't know if you remember the Ontos or not. It was a crazy looking thing. It was like on a platform, a mule, and it had like 6 recoilless rifles. And we also had quad 50 machine guns.
Did you have infantry around there to protect the position?
We had we had 2 units that would rotate in and out. There was 3-4 and 1-9. 1-9 was the infamous Walking Dead. They retired their standard just 2 years ago, I believe, but I took care of those guys, and they were notorious in Vietnam for taking the highest casualty counts of the Marine Corps in the war, especially Charlie and Bravo companies.
And what shoulder weapons did they use?
They, when I got there, they had the M14s, and shortly thereafter they transitioned to the M16s. There was a transition going on in late '67, and just north of Kamlo there was a really nasty battle, and the Marines in 1-9, I think it was Charlie Company, got ambushed, and the weapon had not been perfected. The weapon was perfected, but they were using the Army insisted on using old gunpowder that they had tons of in the projectile, and would cause the shell casing to expand, and the rifle would jam. And during this one particular battle, a lot of the Marines were found with their cleaning rods trying to clear their weapons, and a bullet hole in their head where the enemy just come up and shot them in the head. And it was a bad, nasty fight.
I think you had told me that somehow or another you got a basketball goal put up on top of that hill.
I was so hurting to play basketball, and this was a hill, and being a dentist and having street smarts, I don't know how I got street smarts, but I somehow did. I traded dental services for the CB bulldozer driver to scoop off a flat place, and I built with my own hands, I built a basketball backboard and had somebody bring me a goal and a net back from Okinawa, and it was the highlight of because we had a lot of black guys, and of course, being from Indiana and like you, liking basketball, that was our twilight pastime, and on Sundays. In fact, the one Sunday we really got hit bad. The first rocket round, we were playing basketball, and the first rocket round, they had zeroed in on the Marine mess tent, and they waited until noon chow, and the first rocket hit the Marine mess tent, and the second rocket, 10 seconds later, hit the middle of the basketball court where we were playing. So we had just time to DD off the basketball court and jump in our hole. But then
So you got in before the second round came in?
Yes. Wow. Yeah. And that was the first time I'd ever been rocketed. We'd had regular artillery, but these things, you can hear them coming from a long distance away because they're made in Russia, and they have a motor that drives them, and they look like a miniature telephone post. I mean, they're about the height of that door, and they're fired from a tripod.
And when they land, they explode like a huge hand grenade,
They
shrapnel
explode like
and stuff?
they explode like what they are, a big piece of artillery. But they have a better range because of the rocket engine. And so I was in my foxhole,
And describe a foxhole or your foxhole?
It was that was our first order of business when we got there. Everybody had to have a.
Yeah, no matter how big, how deep, how wide, what? Was it easy to dig it or hard or what?
Mine was already
there.
there, and I had sandbagged around it, and I was laying there in the fetal position, and I'd been there long enough that I knew the guys that were having chow, and they started calling my name, and
so there were no corpsmen up in that area?
there were, but they weren't there, and they were there, but they weren't, and everybody was in their bunker, and maybe it was because they knew my name, and I would have much more willingly stayed in my hole in the fetal position, because these were scary things, and they were big, and you could hear them coming, and they made a horrendous explosion when they hit, and a big hole, and but because they called my name, and I knew they were in trouble, I got out of my hole, took my medic kit, and ran over to the Marine mess tent.
How far away was that?
It was approximately 30 yards, and my helmet was bouncing on my head, so I threw that off because I wanted to be able to hear, and I never thought I could hear the rounds coming with the helmet on. So I ran over to the Marine mess tent, and it was really a dry time of year, and it was really dusty, but it was like a scene from Dante's Inferno, because the whole tent was in shreds, the wooden pallets were all splintered, and the Marine wounded were all in disarray, and the first guy I came upon had a femoral bleed, and it was spurting in the air, and I took my belt and tied that off just to, because you can really bleed out quick from a femoral bleed, and you don't have to be a trauma surgeon to know that, and then I took care of a couple other guys with shrapnel who just put battle dressings on, like we were trained at Phil Medical Service School in Pendleton, and then I saw this horrible sight. There was a guy laying on his back with the frontal portion of his skull sheared off, and he was like projectile vomiting, reflex vomiting, and subsequently drowning on his own vomit. And I said, how am I going to get this guy to breathe? And the only thing, I couldn't give him mouth to mouth very well, and you stop and you don't have a lot of time to think. So I said, well, I'll try to do a trach on him. So I had a scalpel in my kit bag, and I did a trach, and I had a 3rd Marine Division pen, the old Schaefer pen that you could unscrew. I unscrewed that and put the tube part in his throat, and you could hear the air go in. And about that time, this was in a flat open area, and there was no place to hide. All the other Marines were up. It was like a bowl around the messing area, and there were bunkers around it, and they were looking out through their slits, but there wasn't anything they could do to help, and that wasn't their job anyhow. So I was like in the middle of a clock, and then right in the middle of trying to get this, after I got him breathing, then another rocket came in at 12 o'clock, one at 3, one at 6, and one at 9 on the clock. And all you can do is lay there and hope. And it seems the time from when you hear them coming to when they hit, it seems like a lifetime, because it's all so random. You don't know where they're going to hit. and the barrage lifted momentarily, and I took my canteen and wetted a battle dressing and slapped it over his forehead to keep his brain tissue moist, and then another Marine, I called him over and he came and helped me.
Was the guy conscious at this time?
No, he was completely unconscious, and another Marine came over and he helped me because the barrage had lifted, and I grabbed his arms and he grabbed his legs, and we tried to carry him up this dirt hill to the safety of a bunker, and then more rocket rounds start coming in, and your legs felt like rubber. They just didn't seem to work, and you were trying your hardest, and I was young and strong, and I'm not young, but I'm still strong, and it just seemed like it took 5 hours to get from that flat area to the safety of the bunker. But we did finally get him in there, and just as we got him in the door, some more rounds hit. And they make the doors L-shaped with sandbags all around them, so if a round hits right outside the door and the shrapnel splays out, if you get around that corner, you're safe, because it can't follow you around the corner. Well, it hit right outside the door as we got around the corner. And I stayed with the wounded. He was the worst of the wounded. The other ones were taken to the safety of the other bunkers, and they brought in a medevac helicopter, and he was flown out. And nothing would have probably been ever made of this, but it was like this flat area was like, with the bunkers all around, it was basically like a Roman amphitheater, and we were the gladiators. And so all the Marines on the hill saw what happened, and I was relatively well liked before that. I was liked a lot after that, and they wrote up a recommendation for a Silver Star, and the Marine Corps is the stingiest with their awards, so it was downgraded to a Bronze Star, and like 3 months later it came back and signed by General Krulak, the first General Krulak, whose son subsequently became a Commandant of the Marine Corps. This was Victor, they called him. He must have been quite a guy. I never met him in person, but he was famous with the Marines.
Did you follow up on the wounded? Did they make it?
Yes, I got the wounded Marine's name, and I do know he was from Brule, Nebraska, and I would call his mother once a year until I couldn't do it anymore, because I could hear the sadness in her voice. And then I start feeling bad for keeping him alive. And but I would just want to make sure he was still okay. And he'll never, I knew he'd never be a concert pianist, but you just, you want to know, because he was my worst wounded I ever had. I had a lot of them.
Did any of the guys, were any of the guys killed on that episode? Not the one, well, I mean the ones in that nest tent.
That day, no. Nobody was killed. There was a lot of wounded, seriously wounded, but nobody was killed. Thank the Lord.
So, the next day, was it just standard operating procedure? I mean, you just go on after something like that, or what?
Yes, the next day was, the next day. I didn't sleep much that night, and I wrote my parents a letter about what happened. But there was in my opinion, a much more gallant act that took place on that hill that day, and that one of the rockets hit outside the magazine, the powder magazine for the 8-inch guns, where they had all the powder bags, and it caught on fire. powder magazine was not too far from the projectile magazine, but they were separate, because they get the powder and the projectile, load them in the 8-inch guns and fire. And I saw a Marine run in with a fire extinguisher in this powder magazine and put out the fire. Now, if that would have exploded, it would have just annihilated the whole hilltop. And I never found out what happened with this Marine. He probably never even got a pat on the back for that. But that's the guy who should have got him, in my opinion, a Medal of Honor. I can't believe, that's why I love the Marines so much, because they were just the best of the best, and they would do anything, and they really appreciated their corpsmen and their docs, and they let you know it, and that's why even after being in all 4 services, I always go back to they're my favorite.
So when you were in Vietnam, you were mainly associated with the Marines. Were you around the Army guys at all, or much?
Towards the end of my tour, the 101st, the Screaming Eagles, they relieved us along the DMZ. 3rd Marine Division stayed there for another like 6 months, and then they all pulled out and went back to Okinawa, and the Army took over. But until that time, it was everything along the DMZ was a Marine operation, 3rd Marine operation.
And in comparing, the 101st has quite a great reputation.
Sure do.
And so, were they similar in, I mean, from your dealings with them or whatever?
The Army, I did interact with them, and being with the Marines, I was impressed. I thought every Army troop had his own Jeep. They had much better helicopters. We had the old H-34s, they had the Hueys. And I said, well, why should this be? Why should the Marine Corps have such old, worn-out equipment? And the Army would be so well equipped, and I still don't know the answer to that to this day.
But I meant as a individual fighting man, let's put it that way, or a troop, the troops.
Well, you have to remember they were mostly draftees too, and
now the Marines were not drafted, were they? The Marines were.
No, the Marines weren't drafted.
Right.
But a lot of them were told either go in the Marine Corps or go to jail, and so we had some interesting characters. One of them I became buddies. I got along with the enlisted men as well as I did the officers, and I always, any officer's code should be you should always look out for your men first. You're always last in the chow line. If they have problems, you take care of them. So one incident in that hilltop, a guy, a Marine enlisted, he was a cook. He got a Dear John letter saying that his brother was sleeping with his wife, and he just went berserk. He picked up his M16 and just chased everybody out of the bunker, and so they didn't know what to do. They said, Doc, what are we going to do? And I said, well, I don't know, but we can't leave him in there like that. He might commit suicide. And so I went in there, and I had my medical bag with me, and I was just trying to, like a police movie, try to talk him down and get him calm, and he was starting to calm down, and then he was so terribly upset. He started foaming at the mouth, and came at me, and I basically slugged him, pulled out some Thorazine from my kit and stuck it in his leg, and held him down until the Thorazine took effect, and then medevaced him. But I put myself in his shoes. What a horrible thing to be in Vietnam, to get a letter like that your wife's sleeping with your brother, and goodbye, and you can't do a thing about it.
You hear about, they said that drugs were rampant and all this kind of stuff with the troops over there. Did you see much of that?
I saw very little of it. I would walk the lines sometimes in the fighting holes, and smelled marijuana, but it was a much bigger to-do made over it than really happened. The Marines, I think, were more disciplined with that than the Army. It was much more rampant in the Army. Not to say that it didn't happen. One incident that did happen was the gentleman, I still never forget his name. I've been trying to track him down ever since then. His name was Paul Scaglione. He was the one that carried the feet, and I carried the arms to get the guy to the bunker. He came back from Thailand with like a large supply of heroin, which I think he probably planned on making a profit from, but he was caught, and they court-martialed him. Here again, I was trying to look out for the guys, and I was a character witness at his trial. I do know he was sent to Leavenworth, and I don't know for how long he served, but the Marines, they would look maybe a little askance at marijuana, but heroin was a different story.
So, how long were you over in Vietnam then? I
got there in December of '67, and I left right in like January of '69. So back to March Air Force Base, which we just passed this morning.
That's
and
right.
I'd forgotten about it.
Yeah. So the rest of your time, so this action all happened within like the first month that you were there, that you kind of related pretty much, wasn't it?
Yes. So I had to learn quick. After about 5 months, my CO relieved me and sent another dentist to. By that time, I had the facility all dug in. I had the routes to where I would go all established. I knew what days expect the dentist to come, and he took over. And the trailer was in a. I had the Seabees dig a revetment because I got tired of the trailer getting so many holes in it. It was just sitting up there, and I think the enemy thought it was something important because they used it for a target. And one day during a artillery barrage, and this is after I dug it underground, I had a cheap lawn chair, and I got up to go jump in my hole, and I came back, and there was a big hole in the back of my chair. So I said, well, I got to make this better yet. So I put steel plates and sandbags over the top of it, and then the other dentist that relieved me, I gave everybody a nickname, and he was from Tip City, Ohio, and his last name was Smith, so he became Tip City Smitty. And he took over, and subsequently the monsoon started, and he could see there was going to be a problem with water coming in there. So he dug a drainage ditch to bleed off the water so the trailer wouldn't get flooded. Unfortunately, he tied the drainage ditch into the drainage ditch from the messing facility, and all the slop and garbage from the messing facility all ran into his trench where the trailer was. And I came out with a bunch of other guys afterwards to help him clear the thing out. And I said, Smitty, you lost your first command at sea. Because we teased each other relentlessly. Yeah. After I finished there, they sent us to a place called Quang Tri Combat Base, and it was still in combat range. It was still within artillery range, but it was a bigger place, and we still would get shelled and mortared and rocketed, but at least there were other Navy medics and dentists and physicians around, and it was like you go to work in the morning and treat patients and come back to your pooch at night. And
how often would you get leave?
I only got one R&R, and at that time, before I left for Vietnam, I was stationed at Lemoore, as I told you, in the San Joaquin Valley, and I was dating an enlisted wave. I met at the Oak Club. She was a hat check girl, because she was pretty, and the officers chose her, I guess. And we started going out, and I guess I wasn't supposed to, but you know, she was my girlfriend, and we wrote while I was in Vietnam, and being a wave and being pretty, she managed to hitch a ride on a KC-135 tanker from the West Coast to meet me in Okinawa for R&R. And I'd been stationed on Okinawa, so I knew there was an R&R spot that was real peaceful, real beautiful, real quiet in the northern part of the island. And I still knew people from my tour, other couples that met me at the plane. So it was like a homecoming. And then I had to hitchhike back. You traveled with your dirty uniform, your web gear, and I had a carbine that I kept. And I remember getting on the plane at Okinawa, it was a C-130, and flying to Clark, and then trying
Philippines.
Clark Air Base in the Philippines, and trying to get a ride back to Vietnam. I had surreptitiously, this was the era of the mimeograph machine, and I had a stack of mimeographed blank orders, and I would fill in the spaces.
So honestly, might be a good time to change tapes.
Of Camlo Hill. These tanks were usually not all gathered together there, and this is the Marine mess tent right here, and this is the flat area where I got caught in the open, and right next to the mess tent. And the tanks were not there. The tent was all in shreds. The pallets, the wooden pallets that we walked on to keep out of the mud, were all in splinters.
John, why don't you kind of point to some of these areas you're talking about here?
So basically, this is where the first 122mm Russian rocket hit, and later when I went back to look at the area, I found the rocket engine and big pieces of shrapnel, and it was only manufactured like 4 months before in the USSR, so they had a good supply line. That's Camlo Hill.
Yeah, and where did you guys have to carry him to?
I had to get him from here up to this bunker.
Wow.
And it seemed like 40 miles.
I can see that's pretty good, pretty steep.
Yeah, it was like furrowed fields of farmland in Indiana, and you just kept tripping and stumbling and falling.
So I would imagine you, like you said, you had to have some humor going on to kind of survive, I suppose. And can you talk about some of the things that you guys did?
I had a sense of humor before I went to Vietnam. My sense of humor increased while I was in Vietnam because it was such a bizarre situation. And any time when you're in the company of only men, the humor has a tendency to get somewhat out of hand, and I was always the instigator. I can't remember some of the things we did, but you know, we had the hooch with the corrugated tin roof, and the Marines and the Navy were always ragging at each other. So I took a paint can and a paintbrush and went up on the top of the roof and in big letters so you could see it from the air, put U.S. Navy. And there was this other guy I really liked. His name was Joe Lyle. In fact, he and his wife came with me to the last 3rd Med Battalion reunion in San Diego, and I hadn't seen him for years. He was from Ohio also, and he was so sloppy that I think his wife was kind of offended, but the nickname I gave him was Joe Shit the Ragman. And I remember Joe did some funny things. We had a rough plywood floor in that hooch, and he somehow got a hold of a can of wax and was trying to wax his area where his bunk was. And towards the end of our tour, we had heard a lot of incoming rounds, and so we would kind of make a joke out of it. And I remember one night we were having incoming rocket fire, and he put on a yellow hard hat, not a helmet, and was in his baggy underwear, and took a big pole with a flag on it, and was directing everybody to where to seek shelter, and I was right with him. So we were I guess you call it bravado, you know, saying, hey, we've been there, done that, we're not afraid of this. You guys that are, this is where you go. And during that time, my job was also to identify dead bodies with their dental records. And when they would bring the bodies in, they were oftentimes burned beyond recognition. Indeed, that's why they needed identification. And being a dead body, they were very stiff. So there was no way you could appreciate this as a fellow dentist. You couldn't open their jaws, so you had to take cutting shears and cut, and then take like a bar to pry their mouth open, so you could identify who they were. And that stayed with me. I had another tent mate who worked in graves registration, and he would always somehow keep us abreast of how many dead came in that day. And
did you ever see any enemy dead?
Especially at on the road and at Camlow, at Camlow Hill, shortly after an RPG hit one of our Jeeps and hit the gas tank as it was coming in our wire in the opening, and it just burned to death the two guys in the Jeep, and those were two of the guys I had to identify. And they brought a lot of prisoners in there, and a lot of enemy weapons. I managed to acquire 2 AK-47s and an SKS rifle, which came in handy later. And I remember seeing a lot of enemy prisoners, and they would be either blindfolded or have a sandbag put over the head and their hands tied behind their back. And I always remember when the reaction whenever they heard a helicopter. Even they knew they were in a bunker tied up with their hands, and they would cower because they were so used to being fired on by helicopters. They didn't like the helicopters. And when we had dead bodies, I remember one time there was probably about 25 enemy dead, and you know, you had to police up the area for sanitary reasons. And I still remember to this day it was a unique scene, because what they did was they piled them in a triangle on the road, and they poured kerosene and gasoline on them and lit them off. And the smell, needless to say, was something that stays with you. The smells, you see pictures and photos of Vietnam, but you can't really appreciate it without the smells, like of burning flesh. And you know, we had like these, you're from a farming community, you remember the outhouse. Well, we had like 4 in a row, and they would slide the half of a 55-gallon drum under, put kerosene in the 55-gallon drum, and then when it got pretty much full, they would slide them out. And whoever the Marine was that got in trouble that day for something, his job was to light that off in the bucket and take a paddle and stir it until it was all burned. And that was another, kerosene and fecal material make for a really bad smell. And
you said something about that rifle, that enemy rifle. How did that fit in later?
One of the AK-47s, it was a nice weapon. It was a Chinese-made weapon, and here again, I was always pushing the envelope. I disassembled it and sent it home in parts to my Mexican girlfriend, who was away. And when I came home, I reassembled it and kept it as a war souvenir. The other one, when I went to Da Nang to go back home, I knew I had a few street smarts by then, and I knew that the game the Marines played was go up to the desk, and the guy says, "Okay, Doc, we'll send you home to California, but you gotta go to Okinawa for 2 weeks." And I knew this guy hadn't been where I'd been, and I said, "Well, is there any way I can get out sooner?" He says, "No, you gotta go through Okinawa." And there was a counter there, and I had my sea bag, and I had this other AK-47 in there, and I said, "Sailor, look over the counter." And I said, "You see what's in this bag?" And he said, "Yes, sir." And I said, "If I can get home a little sooner, this can be yours. No questions asked." He says, "You'll be out in the morning, sir." I don't know what I gave the SKS away because it wasn't as neat as the AK-47s.
Yeah.
I kept that AK-47 for years, and then when I went back on active duty in the Air Force, of course it was an illegal weapon because it was an automatic weapon. There was a known drug dealer in town in Ormond Beach, and I sold it to him. So here again, I was always pushing the envelope, but I couldn't go back in the military with an automatic weapon, so I had to get rid of it.
So, and I think you said you flew back into March.
Flew back into March, as I was telling you on the way over here, and told Linda earlier, the sun was rising off the coast of California. It was the most beautiful sight in the world. And I remember all the other guys start getting really excited and chattering, and I just start crying. I was just so happy to be back home and alive. And I came to a big airfield and nobody to meet me, didn't know a soul, and drove up to Fresno and picked up Norma and took her with me to my next duty station, which was St. Simon's Island, Georgia. And we lived together for a while there.
And what did you do there? What was your job?
I was a dentist in St. Simon's at Brunswick Naval Air Station, which is now like an FBI training base. And I had an older, really old school Navy captain dental CO, and we were like oil and water. I was just full of happy to be alive, ready to do anything, try anything, and he was trying to make me an officer and a gentleman as like the old school, and so we just didn't get along. And he wrote bad fitness reports on me, and I said, I got to get out of here. So I put in for oral surgery residency and got accepted, and subsequently went to Bethesda, Maryland, where I did my first year of oral surgery, and it was all anesthesia. So basically I did general anesthesia for a year, and that was interesting. I said, well, we want to make sure you know how to draw blood, so go down to the lab and start drawing blood. And I knew how to do an IV by that time anyhow, so that was no big deal. And then basically they just threw me right in the general anesthesia. I'd watch for a couple of cases, and then they said, okay, you can take over. And my head resident was a former prison guard from Georgia, and he was a big fat guy, and he was mean. And he would do little tricks like while I was really concentrating on bagging this patient under anesthesia, he would come in and pull the oxygen line, and you'd see the patient start to get blue and say, holy smokes, what's wrong here? And you'd finally figure it out that somebody played a trick on you. And but I did learn to be a good anesthetist. I learned how to do spinals and axillary blocks, and I had orders to San Diego, and for my second and third year to finish to be an oral surgeon, but I didn't want to be an oral surgeon anymore. So they said, well, what are we going to do with you? And I said, well, I don't know, just give me orders. And they gave me orders to the USS Saratoga, which was out of Mayport, Florida, and I got there in time to get on board and go to the Mediterranean. We did 2 med cruises, and
What year was that?
It was in like 1970, and that was very exciting for me because I'd been everywhere in the Orient, but I'd never been to Europe, so that was my introduction to Europe. Our first landfall was Holyloch, Scotland, and got to see the castle at Edinburgh, and we went from there down through the Straits of Gibraltar, North Africa, and into the Aegean, and the Tyrrhenian, and the sea off of Yugoslavia. I'll think of it. But and each port we would stop at, because I had so much leave built up from Vietnam, I would travel overland and meet the ship at the next port. And that's how I got to learn Europe. It was not too difficult. I couldn't speak a word of French except maybe oui or non, and but you manage, and it's an adventure.
Did you get any rides? Any plane rides off the ship?
Yes, I've forgotten about that. Thanks for reminding me. Still being an adrenaline junkie, as I am to this day, I was like the dentist for the pilots, and for lack of a better term, the flight dentist, because they had to be, not only had to pass their flight physical with the flight surgeon, but they had to be up to par with their teeth. And so I'd say, hey, how about give me a ride? And he said, you sure you want to do this? And I said, yeah. Well, there was a real crazy guy that we became friends, and his name was Snake, and he was an A7 pilot. So he got me a flight suit and put a Red Cross on it and put Pain Merchant. And the A6 driver, they were kind enough, because it was a right seat, left seat, and the right seat was the bombardier navigator, and so they gave me like 3 flights, and it was would shoot you off on the catapult, and
was it everything you thought it would be?
And more. I said, Snake had the best description of a cat shot. I said, Snake, how would you describe a cat shot? He said, it's a cross between good sex and a car wreck. And Snake and I got out about the same time. I went to Ormond Beach and went into practice with an older dentist who was a former World War II Corsair pilot. And Snake opened a bar. And he had a bar and a banner towing service where he'd tow banners along the beach advertising, and a plane, and I had, by that time I had an old beach house that I fixed up, and he'd see me sunbathing on the roof, and he would do the snake maneuver to say hello. And one day I was working in my dental office, and the receptionist came back and says, Doctor, there's a gentleman at the front door. He says his name is Snake, and you know him, and he says he needs your help. And I was like, okay. I went out there, and there was Snake standing there, and had a white towel around his belly soaked in blood. And I says, Snake. I said, what happened? He says, well, I made a mistake. I said, well, what happened? He says, well, a guy was raising hell in my bar, and he asked me to step outside, and I thought he hit me, but he stabbed me. And I said, well, what are you doing here? And he says, well, you're the only guy I knew. So I took him to the ER, and it was just a through and through. It just looked worse than it was, but you know, when they didn't get the ball or anything, but it was a bad bleed. And as luck would have it, that was my first date I had with my wife-to-be, Linda. I took her to the hospital to visit my friend Snake. You know, I couldn't think of anything more romantic to do.
Oh, wow.
And we stayed friends. I've lost track of him now because I left that area.
So what prompted you to get out of the Navy then?
My ship was home ported in Mayport, south of Jacksonville, and they said, okay, we're going to take this ship and we're going to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and the squadrons are going to fly bombing missions off of North Vietnam. And I said, been there, done that. I know this would be a lot safer and cleaner, and the food would be better, but I was planning on making a Navy career, but that was the catalyst that made me get out. And so I got out and went to practice in Ormond Beach.
Which is, where is that? Where's Ormond?
It's right next to Daytona Beach. Everybody, and it's directly, as the crow flies, straight east of Orlando, up out on the ocean.
And you went in with an older fellow, did you say?
Went in with an older fellow, and he introduced me to the patients, and he had a laboratory portion of his office that I made into 2 operatories with my own hands, and I paid for my own equipment and started seeing patients. And he was the golden boy because he's been there forever, and I was the new kid on the block, so he had to tell him, hey, Dr. Schiff's a good dentist, you can trust him. But I was a good dentist, and so I stayed with him, and we brought in a 3rd guy, and then the 3rd guy and myself, we branched out and opened a new office and built it from the ground up, and then brought in another gentleman. And it was always touch and go financially because we had so many debts, and I just got tired of the debts and the worry of keeping the thing afloat. And it was successful, very successful. But I missed the Navy, and I had a patient. I missed the service. And, I had a patient at that time that was the fundraiser for the chairman of the Military Appropriations Committee, whatever that is in Congress, and I was in I couldn't get back in the Navy because my time had run out, and I was fleet retired, whatever. And so I said, well, I'll join the Air Force.
And you had, how many years had you had in the Navy?
I had 8.5. So I decided I missed the military, and I said, well, I can just kind of tiptoe in as a reservist, and I can still wear the uniform, and I would go down to Patrick Air Force Base and do my reserve duty 1 day a month, and that built up my time towards retirement. And then along comes this guy, and I was restless, and this was the longest I've ever been in one place, and I said, hey, you've got some pull with Congress. What's the chances of me going on active duty? And he said, why would you want to do that? I said, well, I just would like to leave this town, and I want to live overseas again. And he said, well, think about it. And I did, and I said, next time I saw him, I said, yeah, I want to do it. And he said, okay, I'll talk to the senator or congressman or whoever it was. And the Air Force came back with this letter and said, this is highly irregular, but due to the source of the request, we will put you back on active duty. You will retain your, by that time I'd been promoted to lieutenant colonel in the reserves. You will, usually they drop you back a rank, but they didn't because of this guy. And so on 4 February, the anniversary of my special day in Vietnam, I got on a plane with my reluctant wife and flew to Spokane, Washington. And
What year was that?
it was 1988.
And how many years had you been in Florida?
I think 16.
16, no, that yeah. And what did you do with your practice there?
Just they bought me out. I would have given it away. I think they gave me $100,000 for it, and I turned around and used part of that money to try to keep my wife happy. I bought a nice house in Spokane.
On the golf course?
Exactly. You came to visit.
I did.
Muirfield Lane.
That's right.
There was a big cliff and a golf course,
And you had Mongo?
and Mongo the cat. and all my nice antiques that I collected. And
We went, when we came, you also took us out to Fairchild because they had a fly-in or a special day there with all the
there was
planes.
an air show.
Air show.
Yeah,
good.
that's right. Your timing was great.
Yeah.
David was in Washington State because he had good friends in Spokane. And,
They can call it.
yeah, wonderful people. And I was so happy to see you guys. And
I remember the first thing I said, well, how do you like it here in Spokane?
yeah, yeah. And of course, the first thing I did was get David out on the basketball court with the young Soul Brothers. And here's these two. We were older then, not as old as we are now. Was it 2-on-2 or 4-on-4?
I think we played 5-on-5 actually. I think it was,
5-on-5.
yeah.
But
We did all right.
it was a close game, but David hit the winning shot. Soul Brothers couldn't believe it. He hadn't lost his touch.
That's right. Yeah. I said, watch those toes.
Yeah, that's right. But, I really enjoyed that. It was fun.
How did you like it at Fairchild?
I tolerated it. It was a lot of gloomy weather. I met one of the most memorable guys in my life there. He was a patient, and he was a cowboy, and he was retired Army. He was worked for the CID or whatever, an investigative officer in Japan. And he retired on a small ranch in south of Washington State, right on the Idaho border, where they all come together there. And he was so well loved. And I remember I took Linda down there, and I said, we're going to go to like a rodeo. And she put on this gaucho hat, because I guess she thought this was the closest she had. Always wanted to be one in style. She put on this gaucho hat, and the first thing this is the first time he ever met her. And he said, "Holy shit, what are you, some kind of movie star?" And it got worse after that. And she'd never seen any of these animals, and there was a 4-H show, and she loved animals, and I thought she was going to vapor lock, because she got to pick up these little sheep and the pigs, and she said that they're so beautiful. What are you going to do with them? And the girl says, we're going to eat them. So then we went to the rodeo, and they had the bull riding, and the bull was a big old bull. He got loose and jumped over the fence, and everybody was chasing the bull, and Linda was like ready to pee in her pants, and that was her introduction to the West. and this was such a lovely couple, Mac and Eunice. He was a guide, a hunting guide for elk hunting, and he had an old pickup truck, and they were so kind to us that he built a seat, because you couldn't put 4 people in the cab. He put a seat in the back facing backwards, so he could take us on tours of the mountains and the spring flowers, and took us horseback riding. Linda and I, Eunice didn't go, and one day we were riding on a real steep mountain trail, and there was a rattlesnake, and my horse spooked. It just took off, and I couldn't stop him, and he ran all the way back to the barn, stopped on a dime and threw me. I did a flip and landed on my butt, and got back on him. And we shot guns and rifles and everything, all the guide things, and he was so well loved and respected. He was the head of the sheriff's posse for that area, and when I left to go to Korea, I got a letter from his wife, and he'd been riding his fence line, and his horse threw him, and barbed wire cut his leg, and he had a femoral bleed, and he died out in the wilderness. They didn't find him for like 2 days. And I was so sad, because he was such a wonderful guy. And I think the whole county came to his funeral. Mac and Eunice Halsey. Never forget them.
So did you get orders to Korea, or did you ask for them, or did you request?
As usual, I couldn't stay in one place too long, so Korea was considered a hardship tour, and you weren't allowed to take your wife, and so I put in for orders to Korea, and because I was eventually trying to get to Germany. I knew if I did Korea for a year, they would give you what you wanted after that. And so I went to Korea and subsequently sent for my wife, and it was against the rules, of course, and she loved it. She got a job teaching the Korean wives married to the GIs, and they couldn't hardly talk to each other because there was a language barrier, and Korean is a difficult language. But she taught them American cooking and American culture, and they loved her and she loved them. And
John, I think they're closing up, so let's end this. Okay, John, we were talking. Last time we were talking. You were over in Korea, I believe, and you and Linda were there. So why don't we pick up there?
yes, we were sent from Washington State to Osan, Korea. It's a fighter base about 45 minutes south of Seoul, and it was supposed to be an unaccompanied tour, but I had Linda come over, and I think it was one of the best years of her life. She really liked it. Her job was teaching the Korean ladies who married the GIs, and they couldn't hardly speak to each other. She taught them cooking and American culture, and
Did you live on the base there?
we lived in the BOQ. I fixed it up to make it habitable, and Linda liked it. She was a very beautiful woman, and somebody started rumoring that she was Miss Texas. So anytime we'd go to Seoul, the people would stop her on the street in the shopping district outside of the base in Seoul and say, "Oh, are you Miss Texas?" And she would just get embarrassed.
So where was the base again?
It was Osan Air Base. It was the same air base that the F-86s flew from during the Korean War, when they fought the MiGs up along MiG-Allen.
And how far from Seoul would that have been?
It was about a 45-minute to an hour bus ride south of Seoul.
Okay. I've heard of Tan Son Nhut.
Tan Son Nhut is in Vietnam.
Oh, it's in Vietnam.
It's
Oh,
the
I'm sorry.
southernmost airfield in Vietnam Air Force.
Did you ever go through there, Tan Son Nhut?
I did when I went down for like a 2-day course in Saigon. It was the only time I ever went to Saigon. It was quite civilized. It was still the Paris of the Orient.
Yeah. One of those Life magazines that back in the 40s talked about how, they call it the Paris of the Orient.
Exactly,
And it just
exactly.
Must have really been quite a
It was
city.
It was a beautiful city. I'm sure it still is. I can't quite bring myself to call it by its new name, Ho Chi Minh City. I still call it Saigon.
So how many years, what were your duties there in Korea?
In
South
Osan,
Korea.
it's quite interesting. I was the XO of a large dental group. We had a state-of-the-art hospital. It was built entirely underground with blast-proof doors and gaskets and everything, and would withstand an atomic attack if indeed the North Koreans ever decided to reinvade South Korea. And it was far enough back from Seoul that it was meant to take casualties from the line that would have formed it south of Seoul. And state-of-the-art hospital, very nice, very clean, and enjoyed my duties there.
Were there any flare-ups with North Korea or anything while you were there?
There were. They discovered that the North Koreans were trying to tunnel under the DMZ, big tunnels that would actually run large numbers of troops through. The commanding general the dentist in the Pacific came to visit, and I got the enviable or unenviable job of arranging for his escort on a helicopter up to visit the DMZ, in what's called the Bridge of No Return, where the prisoners were repatriated. And it's a real interesting area. It's still heavily patrolled, and there are incidents. Nothing as bad as when the poor soldier got hatcheted by the North Korean soldier when they were trying to clear some trees, and there was a nasty fight, but that was before I got there.
Did you and Linda do any traveling in the Orient while you were there?
Yes, we did. We traveled on out of Gimpo Airport in Seoul to Bangkok and to Hong Kong. Cathay Pacific, a wonderful airline, and Linda had never been to these places, and I had, and I wanted her to see how nice they were. And she was just flabbergasted.
So how long were you there? Was that a 2-year tour?
It was a 1-year tour.
1 year.
1 year. So I tried to cram a lot into 1 year.
And where did you go from there?
From Osan, came back to Washington State, picked up my car and sold hers, and drove cross country to Florida, visited my sister along the way, Jane in Chicago, and then I flew on to Germany, Bitburg, Germany. It's on the southwestern border with where Luxembourg, Germany, and Belgium come together.
And what was the name of the
This was called Bitburg Air Base. There's 2 air bases. One was Bitburg, the other was Spangdahlem, and they were old, especially Spangdahlem was an old Luftwaffe air base. And being a military historian like you, David, I enjoyed going around and exploring all the sites of interest. Actually, the Siegfried line that had the dragon's teeth ran right through that area. There was a lot of heavy bunkers that the Germans had built, and
How far were you from Bastogne?
it was about an hour north, but Bastogne, as they call it there, it was about an hour northwest of my base. And it was an interesting little town. You never know, it had been completely, pretty much wiped off the map during the war, but I even had some friends that would come and visit from there. Interesting place.
And you were telling me about a little museum in that area, I think.
There was a museum west of Bitburg called Die Kirk, which I think means the church, and I'm not sure on the spelling, but I went there probably 3 times, and it was a wonderful, the type of war museum that David Thompson would appreciate. It had everything that they could salvage, and some things they couldn't salvage. Old artillery pieces were in the yard, and just a very interesting war museum.
And their feelings towards Americans?
The Germans probably liked us better then than they do now because of this thing in Iraq, but the Germans were always very friendly, and I thought they were very friendly to me because I tried with much difficulty to learn their language, and I could, at that time, carry on a decent conversation with them. I've not been able to practice my Deutsch for a long time, so I would probably revert to Spanish now if I started trying to speak Deutsch. Nice people.
Did you know where your family came from in Germany at all?
I tried and tried and tried. The best I could figure, they were from the Alsace.
Yeah, that's right, you said that. Did you go down to that area?
Yes,
look around
yes. And I came upon this vineyard on the Moselle River near Trier, and there was a big sign, Schiff. So this young couple ran the vineyard, and they probably thought I was crazy. I pulled out my ID, my card, and I said, look, we have the same name. I said, maybe we're related. I was grasping at straws, but it was exciting. And then I saw my in Bonn, on the Rhine River, I saw, I like to explore old graveyards for some reason. I saw them in Barthel oftentimes, which was my mother's side of the family. So I really can't say with 100% certainty exactly where my roots originated, but both sides of the family, parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents were all German.
Winters got pretty cold, I suppose.
The winters got miserable. It would get dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It wouldn't get light, I think, until 9 o'clock in the morning because it was at a high latitude. And I would get really depressed. And Linda wasn't there. She was at school in Sarasota, in the interior design school. And I finally just had my fill of it, and I wanted to come back in Florida, so I came back to Florida. Got out of the Air Force, and I said, well, I'll never finish my 20 years. I came back to Florida and started all over again.
What prompted you to leave the Air Force then? And how long were you over there?
I was over there about a year and a half, and I would get very lonely. It was a gloomy climate.
So it was more getting away from there as opposed to getting out of the Air Force, or?
Yeah, and I had a boss I didn't get along with. I'm not good at working for other people. I do better as my own boss. And, so I just figured it was time to leave. And I'd given up on ever getting my 20 years. And
so what year was this when you came back?
this was 1991 when I returned to Florida. And I started in North Florida and started working my way down the coast, trying to find a place where I wanted to work. It was hard a couple places. These were mall dental offices, and I would come up to the front door and I couldn't go in. And I just would turn around, get in the car, and leave because I didn't want to work in a mall. And finally wound up in Miami, stayed there for 2 weeks, went to the Dental Society and asked, where can I find a job? And he said, well, in Key West. So I said, well, we'll try Key West. And it was my lucky day, February the 4th, the same day as my incident in Vietnam, and so I drove down to Key West and started work that day. Pretty readily saw that it was not the kind of practice I wanted, so that forced me to go out on my own and start all over again. And it was difficult. I didn't have any money, and talked a banker into loaning me money to rent a condo office, which I had to finish out, and then I leased $150,000, $60,000 worth of dental equipment, which took me 5 years to pay off, but I did. And from knowing about, I had 2 suitcases when I arrived, and knew no one, and started all over. Took me 10 years, but after the 5th year, I was grossing $1 million. And netting certainly not $1 million, but making it worthwhile to get up and go to work in the morning. And during those 10 years, I had 8 different homes. I got back with Linda. We'd fix up a place, furnish it, sell it, furnish to move on, and do the same thing with another place. The last place was on Sunset Key, which is an island off of Key West. And Linda found this place, and I think we paid $595 and fixed it up, gutted it, furnished it, and sold it. After the divorce, that's the only thing I got left with. She got the other 2 condos, and I sold it for $1,100,000, and then finally got the second mortgage paid. And the guy that bought it from me didn't do a thing to it. He went back to the UK, and a year and a half later sold it for $1,300,000. So real estate in Key West was kind of strange. But I was just happy to get paid the second mortgage I took out.
And that was took us up to when then?
Took us up to 2002, right around Thanksgiving. 2003, I left once again in February for Costa Rica, and Pretty much the whole year was trying to adapt to a new country and their ways because they weren't going to adapt to my ways.
And why did you choose Costa Rica?
Flipped a coin, and I just...
Had you ever been there?
Yes, I visited twice that year with a Cuban friend who knew the language, and he showed me around. And it was a nice, clean, peaceful place and not too much corruption. And I just never wanted to live a generic life, and I figured it would be better to retire there than Boise, Idaho.
And you've had a couple of hip operations, I think, or hip replacements.
The first one was in '94. The second one was in shortly after my divorce in 2002, I believe.
And so you have a retirement now from, you were telling me a little bit. Tell me about.
Yes, I basically I dislocated my second hip twice, and it made getting up and down from a dental chair very difficult because it's like getting shot. You have to get morphine and be taken to the hospital and put to sleep, and they reset your hip. And it's not a pleasant experience, and so basically I couldn't work anymore, and the VA was very helpful. They took my 70% disability to 100% for hip, and also 100% for post-traumatic stress disorder. So that allowed me to retire with theoretically a lifelong income. It's not a lot, but that's what I'm living in.
And you went to your high school reunion last year, 2003, is that correct?
Yes, it was around October of 2003.
Tell me a little bit about that.
It was really interesting. We had a great time. I stayed with my cousin Bob Borthel, and he said, "We have this friend we should fix you up with. She's but she's in Germany." And I said, "Oh, okay." Well, anyhow, she came back and was kind enough to go to the reunion with me, and she knew more people there than I did because she lived in the east side. Her name's Linda Garrett, and we've stayed friends since then. And some of the guys that were bigger and better basketball players than I, because they were a year older, we got together and went to the Y, and we played the young high school kids 4-on-4, and we beat them every game. And that was the highlight, especially for Tom Langley and myself, because I could never play varsity then, but I felt I was playing varsity now.
Tell me about last weekend down in San Diego, what you guys did.
Last weekend, wonderful weekend. It was second reunion of the 3rd Medical Battalion, 3rd Wing Division. Basically, I was only a dentist there, but I was in the presence of a lot of gentlemen whom I would send casualties to. There was 2 places, Charlie Med at Fubai and Delta Med at Donahaw, and the helos would bring in, we would load them on the helos, and they would go there, and these wonderful men would treat them and put the puzzle of mangled, torn up bodies back together. And they showed some slides of some of the before and after, and I marvel at their skills and reconstructing broken bodies. I always wonder how successful these broken bodies were as far as having their psyche and their minds reconstructed, because that's the hard part. It stays with you.
Yeah. And you were telling me that it's a possibility that you might do some volunteer work or something similar to that.
Yes, I've never gotten over my adrenaline kick. I'm an adrenaline junkie from Vietnam, and one of the doctors told me about this organization. It's called the International Medical Corps. It's run out of California out here, and because I'd overheard him talking about just coming back from Mogadishu and being martyred and rocketed, and I said, hey, that sounds like it's right up my alley, and I know how to handle that. And I said, look, I'm a dentist, but I know anesthesia. I know if I can maintain an airway. I can do surgery. I can do all the things to keep people alive. Is there any room in your outfit for a dentist? I said, I need to be shot at and missed again. He says, well, you're the kind of guy we like because you've been there and done that like we have, and you're not afraid of it, and you know what to do in these situations. And he said, I will email you as soon as I get back. So when I get back to Costa Rica, I will find out if I have the opportunity to be shot at and mortared and rocketed again.
In looking back on your life, I would assume that your life with the Marine is kind of the highlight of your life, probably.
Yes,
Would you not say so?
I've served with all 4 services, but the Marine time was the most meaningful time, and the one that's impressed itself here and here. And
if you had something to say to your children and your grandchildren and on down the line at this point, what would you want to tell them? Not only about yourself, but about life in general and what to look forward to?
I would tell them, number one, I haven't been the best father or grandfather, and you all are aware of that. I'm guilty for not being there when you needed me. I feel bad about that. I seem to have always been overseas or some other place. I miss you kids and love you kids. And what can I say? I should have been a better father and grandfather. I don't want to show up on your doorstep and bore you. But if I could give you any advice, which I'm not privileged to do, but I will do anyhow, I would say don't ever lead a generic life. Live life to the fullest. Do everything you can. Go on every adventure you can. Don't ever pass up an adventure. Take care of your health. Don't ever get fat. And don't forget this grandpa and father who wasn't the grandpa and father he should have been, but who loves you nevertheless.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, David.